Hello, and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe. My name is Jamie, and welcome to part 3 of the Airfix Lightning build. In this part, I'm going to be dealing with the construction, and that all started with the wings. So, as you just seen there, I had the CMK resin landing gear set. So you get some really nice wheel wells actually, but then cutting the moulded in wheel wells, you can see how it warped the wing, but it's not too much of a problem because what we'll do here is using an old set of snippers, not my posh display ones. I'm just going to remove all the plastic bits, and once all cleaned up, when I actually glue the resin wheel bay in, that will sort out that slight warping problem. So we're just going to snip away as much as we can, leaving the gear leg mounting because we're going to use the kit gear leg for that. And then coming in with a flory sanding stick, a very coarse one, we're just going to remove any excess plastic that is left behind. We want a nice smooth surface for the flat resin bit to glue onto. So once that's done, we're just going to have a bit of a dry fit go here, and it fits really quite nicely, and the detail is vastly improved to the very, very plain kit parts. You can see it fits very nicely. So before we're going to glue it, what we're going to do is prime the part, because it's going to be much easier doing it now than when it's actually installed in the wing. So using Mr. Surfacer 1500 thinned with levelling thinner, we're just going to prime all the parts, and you can see there all the extra detail you get around the side walls, all the cabling and structural detail. And then gluing in place is fairly simple. So with a blob of the flexible black super glue from Ammo, the slow drying one, we're just going to apply that and then spread it with a knife blade all the way along the seam. And it's actually really quite thin, this stuff, so it spreads nice and easily, and it will, if there's any slight imperfections, seep underneath into the join as well. So we'll just coax it round, and we'll just leave that to go off. Okay, the fit of the wing parts wasn't very good, frankly, and there was a few short shots and some large gaps. So using Mr. Hobby epoxy filler, that was put in, and then that was all sanded flat. Now you can see that's quite a lot of filler on that one. Actually on the other wing, I actually glued that rear seam first, allowed that to dry, and then glued both sides, which meant I didn't have such a filling job on that one. But once it's all sanded down and the plastic polished up, I came in with an MDC punch, which actually mimics the moulded rivet detail really quite nicely, and that was just restored. It was all done freehand. There was just a sort of a ghost remnant, if you like, of the old rivets, so that was used as a guide. After a bit of scribing, obviously. Work now moves on to the fuselage and the belly plate, this optional parts here. So it was glued in sections and with various different types of glue. So on the back initially a little bit of the Ammo extra thin, and you can see I've already applied some of the black super glue on the inside just to strengthen things. It is just a butt fit. There's no pins or guides or anything like that. And using the same technique as I did on the landing gear wells, just a blob of glue, and then that was spread around, this time with a cocktail stick, into the seam, and that holds it really quite nicely. There was quite a big gap at the front, so more super glue was just put in there with a cocktail stick, and again just spread into place. And this was all backed up on the inside. And it actually flows into that seam really quite nicely, this stuff. As I said, it's really quite thin. Works an absolute treat. And it's less brittle than traditional super glue, just going in with the accelerator there. It is less brittle, so you do get a little bit of give. It is less prone to cracking. But we're not quite finished yet, so in with the Mr. Surfacer 500. I'm going to have to get some more of this stuff actually, because mine's getting really quite viscous. This is just going to help to even up that seam. I don't want to eliminate it completely. I just want to reduce the sort of trench-like gap that we end up. And then just below this kind of fairing, strake, whatnot, we're just going to bung some in there as well. And again, that's just going to help to even out the seam and make it look a bit more smooth. So to remove the Mr. Surfacer, a cotton bud soaked in Mr. Thinner, just their normal thinner. And that makes light work of just dissolving the excess. No sanding here required, just in that little bit. So no detail is going to be lost. And then out with the polishing sponge. And actually the plastic's really shiny, so I did go over the whole airframe actually with this polishing sponge, just to give the primer something to grip onto. For speed, I decided not to mount any weapons. As I said in part 1, I was on a very stiff deadline. So just the super glue was put into the hole and then touched with a bit of accelerator. I think I'm right in saying I put a bit of plastic card on the inside. And it was just a question of building up the super glue until it was proud of the surface. And then straight away, this is the advantage using the accelerator, we can go in with the sanding sticks and polish up the excess. So these sanding sticks are really useful for this kind of job. And using the super glue and accelerator, it really saves time. And obviously time was of the essence with this project, because I had a really very, very tight deadline, as you'll know all about if you've been back and watched episode 1. So we worked through the grades, getting finer and finer, polishing out all the scratches, and I can't feel anything there. So you can see the cockpit's gone in, and that's all been glued in place. I had to remove part of the intake trunking, but not to worry, you're not going to see that. And then just gluing in some extra lead at the front, just to avoid the dreaded tail sitter. Now time to close up the fuselage halves. So what I did, again for speed, is use the black super glue. The other advantage of using the black super glue is you're not going to get any shrinkage at all in the joins. So zero chance of the dreaded ghost seam. With the glue applied then, we can just use a bit of pressure just to hold it while the glue sets, and just going with a bit of the accelerator, which is going to set it instantly pretty much. This glue is not as sticky as normal super glue because it is the slow drying one, so it does kind of tend to spring apart. It doesn't grab straight away. And along the seam I could just feel a little bit of a ridge, which is an excuse just to put a little bit more super glue on the surface, and all this is going to help to eliminate that seam completely. Working in sections, it's quite handy. There's a few holes and things like that, which really helps with breaking it down into sections. And this is just belt and braces really. So this is a mix of the super glue and talc that I'm just spreading over the seam, and this is going to help to seal it all in. Using the accelerator you can get little bubbles and air holes and things like that, which is a result of the chemical reaction. And rotating the sanding stick over the seam, if you just go straight across, you're going to create a flat spot, which clearly we don't need. So I'm just rolling the sanding stick over that seam to maintain the radius section. At the back, this seam's not going to be visible, which is why I've gone in and used the ammo extra thin. Doesn't matter if it's going to shrink at all. With everything sanded and polished, time to restore the panel lines. Using initially the RB Productions panel line saw, that creates the little groove, and then going in with the P cutter. And this is actually my favourite tool of all time, that little panel line saw. The teeth are incredibly fine and they're very shallow, so it'll only cut to the depth of a standard panel line, which is really awesome. And then we can just go in and widen the panel line so it matches all the other panel lines on the aeroplane. And using the blue sanding sponge from Flory Models will just reduce any of the excess plastic that's being pushed out. Toothbrush is really handy just to empty the panel lines of any dust. And then eventually going in with some of the extra thin, which will just melt away any of the rough bits. And it really does make the panel lines look like all the others. The wing fit is okay, and that's as best as I can go, to be honest. This was glued in, just held in place and glued in with the ubiquitous extra thin from Ammo. And it did leave a gap top and bottom. It was worse on the top, which is a bit of a shame because obviously this is going to be a natural metal aeroplane, and I'm very wary about using filler and things like that on these joins. Any tiny little join or gap was filled with Mr. Surfacer, and that can be easily cleaned up with a cotton bud soaked in thinner, and that will just remove the excess. Don't use lacquer thinner, it's too hot and it will start melting the plastic. And I found the rapid drying thinner does that as well. It's too aggressive. So I just use the normal thinner, which works a treat. The levelling thinner is slightly weaker still, but the normal thinner, as I said, works an absolute treat. Right, with the nose ring glued in place, there was a step. The contours didn't match at all, really, and it wasn't so much that there were gaps, but the panel line, the resulting panel line, if you like, would look uneven. So I painted on some Mr. Surfacer, and then when that was dry, I went in with the sanding sticks. And this was just to blend in the contours, actually. Not too aggressive on the grit, but that big wide sanding stick actually is really good. And then to restore the panel line, I use this, I think it's called the Batman saw or something like that. And it's really good for restoring these panel lines around sort of circular shapes. The tape there is just the Tamiya flexible tape, just acting as a guide, and it really does help in restoring that panel line. And again, going in with the cement just to melt away any rough bits. I really wasn't happy with the wing to fuselage join. There was a bit of a gap there. So I used the Deluxe Perfect plastic putty, which is water based, but it tends to have, I think, a really quite fine grain, and it's really easy to sand. So that's why I used that. I didn't use water because I needed the wing was slightly proud of the wing root bit that was on the fuselage. So it's just a question of trying to match up the contours. The Flory sanding sticks were an absolute treat there. Various different types. These extra thin sort of sponge things, they're really handy as well. And it took a fair amount of elbow grease actually to do this, but it was worth it. And you can't really see the join. But this stuff is porous, which is why I went in and just brushed on a coat of Mr. Surfacer, 1200 this one, and then that was polished back. And we're pretty much ready for paint now. So thank you very much for watching. Coming up in part 4 though, we do a bit of wet sanding of primers. Spray on a gloss black base for the metallics, and add a bit of colour. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week for the painting. Bye bye.